Cronkite News starts now.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Connor McGill. Thank you for joining us. New numbers are in for life expectancy in Arizona, and the numbers are not good. Almost every category was down in 2020, according to a report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Cronkite News reporter Emily Miranda has the details from our Washington bureau.
The picture painted by the CDC report is grim. Life expectancy in Arizona fell from 78.8 years in 2019 to 76.3 in 2020, far outpacing the national drop of 1.8 years and falling below the U.S. average for the first time since 2006. One clinical health expert says the Arizona numbers are troubling, but not surprising.
It's very not what we want to see. But I think this is the trajectory that we were on.
Arizona's 2.5-year drop tied with Mississippi for fifth steepest in the nation, and it came during a year when the U.S. overall saw the sharpest decline in life expectancy since World War II. Heart disease and cancer were the leading causes of death in Arizona, followed closely by COVID-19. Reddy adds that suicide and drug overdose play a large role, but are often under-discussed.
This is a state that has been extremely impacted by the opioid crisis. And again, prior to the pandemic, we were seeing very disturbing rates in drug-related deaths in this state. And so we continued to see them through the pandemic.
Men fared worse than women, whose life expectancy is 6 years higher in Arizona. The picture is even worse in minority communities, with the Native Americans especially hard hit, says one Arizona Health Department official.
American Indian Arizonans were 14 years younger at the time of death when compared to Arizonans as a whole. And so we see these very startling disparities across the state that are of high concern.
The last time life expectancy was this low in Arizona was in 1994. It was an estimated 76.2 years. And Dr. Georges Benjamin says it's going to take years to turn things back around.
If you all of a sudden you made everything quote unquote right, life expectancy doesn't reverse that quickly. It will take years to reverse some of these losses of life expectancy.
All the experts agree that there is no simple solution, that it will take more health education and better access to health care, especially in lower income communities, to boost lifespans. In Washington, Emily Miranda, Cronkite News.
AZDHS says one simple way to protect yourself is through preventative health care, such as vaccines, especially now that we're heading into cold and flu season. It's been a year and a half since we saw the first COVID-19 vaccines, and today health officials got a green light to update boosters aimed at Pacific variants. In the U.S., the BA.5 Omicron subvariant continues to dominate, causing nearly 9 out of 10 COVID infections, according to the CDC. Until now, the vaccines have been aimed at the original SARS-CoV virus, but the Food and Drug Administration's approval means a new booster can be made to target COVID subvariants. Some experts worry that the U.S. government is moving too quickly on the boosters without enough human data. Others think earlier versions of the virus could resurface with very targeted vaccines.
There's always a question here of being too slow versus too fast. And I think one of the challenges is if we wait for those data to emerge in human data, not just mice data and human data, we will be using what I would consider to be a potentially outdated vaccine.
Before the new vaccines would become available, the CDC has a chance to recommend them after hearing from an advisory committee. A vote on the decision is expected to happen tomorrow. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services expects to run out of the federal funds it needs to buy and distribute COVID vaccines and treat COVID symptoms. This means that a COVID vaccination could cost you starting next year. Congress hasn't passed the additional COVID relief funding that the White House says is needed for vaccines, testings, and treatments. HHS held a virtual planning meeting with more than 100 representatives from pharmacies, healthcare providers, and consumer groups yesterday. They discussed the transition to commercializing COVID treatments and vaccines, which HHS officials say is necessary. The department says it has acquired 170 million COVID boosters this fall and winter for the vaccination campaign, but it will no longer have money to buy or distribute the vaccines as early as January. It will also run out of its federal supply of several treatments in mid-2023. Portions of Arizona are under an excessive heat warning today. Luke Vickery joins us from the Cronkite News Weather Center with details on just how long those temps are expected to stick around.
Unfortunately, these temperatures are sticking around unless you really love high temperatures in the triple digits. Phoenix, Grand Canyon, and western Arizona are the areas we're going to have that excessive heat warning out until 8 p.m. tonight. And what we should focus on within the next few days is down towards the Imperial Valley area. When you get closer to southeastern California, those are going to be where we're going to see extremely high heat index values coming in the next few days with that moisture flow coming in off the Gulf of California. Saturday, that's the only day we're going to have really much of a change in our conditions, with a little bit of breeze at 10 to 15 miles per hour out of the east. And then Labor Day weekend, we're going to be around 109 degrees. So definitely take your precautions if you're going outside and having fun on those days. In the Cronkite Weather Center, I'm Luke Vickery.
And the weather isn't the only thing heating up this week. College football is finally back in the Valley, and the Sun Devils are welcoming Northern Arizona into town for their season opener. With 43 new players on their roster and 6 new coaches, the expectations for the Sun Devil season are low. They're also not overlooking the NAU team that upset Arizona last year. Coach Herman Edwards and the Sun Devils know the non-conference matchup is not a throwaway game.
We beat Arizona last year. I know they'll be excited about playing the Sun Devils. I think it's a unique situation for all of us to come home, play in our stadium. But we're going to have to play good, and it starts as soon as the ball's kicked, either way.
We're definitely aware of, what happened last year, but last year is last year. We're just worried about this year.
And tomorrow at 7 p.m. in Tempe. After the break, we'll take a look back at stories from our Washington, D.C. Bureau, from a new museum being created to honor the Latino community to an increase in tourism at the nation's capital.
One autumn morning in 1821, I set off alone to a place far away from everything I'd ever known, to the ends of the earth.
Mary? She can work for us. She'll be no trouble.
Does she bite?
Gotta fit in round here.
Some say there's ghosts.
There's nothing so dangerous as a headstrong girl who knows her own mind.
Such a thrill to do this.
Let's start having some fun.
You can do anything.
Experience something personal.
A place of imagination.
I can go anywhere I want to go.
There's something for everyone with Passport on the PBS Video app.
The Smithsonian Institution already operates museums for African Americans and American Indians. And a new museum that will recognize the history of American Latinos took its first steps towards opening this summer, as Daisy Gonzalez-Perez reports from our Washington Bureau.
They may look like a pair of dusty shoes and a battered backpack, but the Smithsonian items are also the seeds for the future National Museum of the American Latino. The museum will help visitors understand how Latinos have contributed and continue to contribute to U.S. art, history, culture, and science.
We all recognize that our children need to see themselves in a gallery, and certainly we at American History agree that Latino history is American history, and we want to show that we've pretty much always have been here.
But the museum itself is still years and millions of dollars away. For now, it is represented by a National Museum of American History exhibit called Presente. The display, which opened in late June, is the first physical evidence of what will become the full museum. It includes the Reeboks, backpack, and an MP3 player left in the Sonoran Desert by a migrant.
These are found objects that were found in the Arizona desert. It tells a very difficult story because we know of the many people who perished trying to cross the desert in Arizona who didn't make it.
Immigration is just one of the themes of Presente. It also looks at colonization, culture, and identity. For visitors like Michael Lopez of New York, it's about time.
I think that it is fantastic and it's overdue. I'm really happy that the United States is really recognizing the contributions that the Latinos have made within the United States.
The museum was first proposed 7 years ago, but a bill calling for the Smithsonian to establish it was not passed until December 2020. That just started the long process of finding a site, raising funds, and building a museum. But Diaz said the final product will be worth it.
Come in here and actually learn about our presence and our contributions. If they come away with a sense of that, then I think we will have achieved some success.
This particular exhibit will be here for the next 2 years, where themes will change throughout. The actual museum has plans to find a permanent home within the next 10 to 12 years. In Washington, Daisy Gonzalez Perez, Cronkite News.
The National Museum of the American Latino is expected to cost $600 million or more, and half of that amount has to be raised privately.
Alarming, severe, historic. Those were some of the words senators used last week to describe the drought in the West. Now, while they all agreed that state and federal officials need to cooperate if things are ever going to get better, an Arizona senator demanded to know if everybody's cooperating as much as they should. Elsa Horteris breaks down the issues from our D.C. bureau.
Arizona Senator Mark Kelly had a lot of questions at a recent Senate Energy and Natural Resources hearing, but it all boiled down to this: is everybody doing their fair share?
And Arizona's done everything that Arizona has been asked.
And he had a specific question for Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Camille Touton.
If basin states cannot reach an agreement, is the department prepared to take actions to impose restrictions on other states without regard to river priority?
Touton didn't say yes, but she didn't say no, telling Kelly that the Bureau is still working with all states on a deal.
Yes, we will protect the system, but we're not at that decision point yet.
The negotiations came as drought across the West has led to record lows in the Colorado River. Lakes Meade and Powell have reached levels that triggered the first phase of drought planning, with projections calling for levels to get lower.
Future water projections in this basin also look grim, and if water levels continue to decline, it would trigger the most severe water cuts for the Southwest.
The hearing included a range of possible measures to mitigate the drought, from desalination to drip irrigation. But every solution came with its own set of problems, and officials called for more data to help decide what to do. That doesn't mean they're waiting to act. Touton pointed to the $8 billion fund for drought response that was included in the recent infrastructure bill, money she intends to see spent.
What I will say, Senator, is I'll spend the bipartisan infrastructure law money to make sure that we're meeting the goals as Congress intended, but also to provide sustainability in the West.
One thing they all agreed on is the need for everybody to cooperate.
And we're going to continue to step up here, but we need partners and long-term commitments from the federal government.
Answers could be coming soon. Touton said the Board of Reclamation expects to make its yearly forecast this August. Elsa Horteris, Washington, Cronkite News.
In an effort to, as Senator Mark Kelly said, do their fair share, numerous Arizona cities, including Tucson and Phoenix, have entered Stage 1 water restrictions.
The committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol continued its hearings today. Members laid out a timeline of pressure that the Trump White House exerted trying to get state officials to overturn the 2020 election. And Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers was a key witness. As Daisy Gonzalez Perez reports from our Washington, D.C. bureau.
Even before he could begin his testimony today, Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers had to deal with more rumors from former President Donald Trump, who claimed in a statement today that Bowers said Trump won in 2020. Bowers had a blunt response.
Anywhere, anyone, anytime has said that I said the election was rigged, that would not be true.
That set the tone for the hearing, in which Bowers testified to repeated efforts by Trump and his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to reverse the election. Bowers said he repeatedly asked for evidence from the Trump team, but that they could never produce it.
At some point, did one of them make a comment that they didn't have evidence, but they had a lot of theories?
That was Mr. Giuliani.
And what exactly did he say, and how'd that come up?
My recollection, he said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence.
Bowers said the calls from the White House began just days after the election and continued through January 6th, with legal theories that were increasingly far-fetched.
Well, I thought of the book, The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, and I just thought, this is a tragic parody.
He also said he was contacted by Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs on January 6, who asked him to support a challenge to the election on the same day it was being certified.
And I said I would not.
Bowers, like other witnesses from Georgia, testified to a campaign of harassment after the election, receiving thousands of emails and voicemail messages and protesting outside his house regularly. But Bowers said he was only following the Constitution, what he called a divinely inspired document, and following the law to uphold the election results.
I do not want to be a winner by cheating. I will not play with laws I swore allegiance to.
In Washington, Daisy Gonzalez-Perez, Cronkite News.
We reached out to Congressman Andy Biggs' office for comment on Bowers' claim that Biggs contacted him on January 6th, but we haven't yet heard back from them.
After mass shootings in Buffalo and Texas, calls for gun control are being raised again in Washington, and advocates from Arizona in the nation's capital this week to press lawmakers on the issue. Elsa Horta-Reyes has more from our Washington bureau.
11 years after she was severely wounded in a mass shooting in Tucson, former Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was back in Washington again to push Congress to act on gun reform.
We must never stop fighting. Fight, fight, fight.
Giffords joined lawmakers and advocates today on the National Mall, where over 45,000 vases with flowers were planted to represent victims of gun violence. 5,000 flowers are orange, to represent the most recent gun violence. The rally comes amid a new push for gun control here after mass shootings at a grocery store in Buffalo killed 10 and a school shooting in Texas killed 19 children and 2 teachers.
There are a lot of very scared parents and kids out there today.
Today's rally was highlighted by leaders of gun reform movements such as March for Our Lives and politicians who spoke about how gun violence has affected their lives.
Since my son Jordan was taken from me from unnecessary gun violence simply for playing loud music in his car.
Both the House and Senate are considering gun control bills, but Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, a longtime advocate for such measures, told the crowd it won't be easy.
We still have an uphill battle, but we are determined to seize this moment and save lives because we have a responsibility.
Giffords, who has been an advocate since the 2011 Tucson shooting that killed 6 people and wounded her and 12 others, called on lawmakers to do the right thing.
Stopping gun violence takes courage.
After a marathon hearing last week, the House Judiciary Committee gave preliminary approval on a bill that would raise the age limit to buy a gun, limit ammunition magazines, and more. That bill could come to the House this week. Elsa Horta-Reyes, Cronkite News.
Today's rally came less than a week after President Joe Biden's emotional primetime speech on gun violence, in which he called on lawmakers to, quote, just do something. Connecticut Senator Murphy briefed the president this morning on a bipartisan push for gun reform in the Senate.
Discussions about how to reduce gun violence have been a constant in Congress since the Uvalde shooting earlier this month. This week, Phoenix Police Chief Jerry Williams made a plea to the Senate Judiciary Committee for responsible gun control. Elsa Horta-Reyes in our D.C. bureau spoke with Chief Williams.
Phoenix Chief of Police Jerry Williams told the Senate committee that the time to start protecting victims of tomorrow is today.
Because today's suspects is often tomorrow's victim.
Williams' comments came during a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing Wednesday on protecting children from gun violence. a hearing that came just weeks after a gunman walked into Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, and killed 19 children and 2 teachers. One theme that kept coming up throughout the hearing is that the problem of gun violence, from mass shootings to suicides, is often a mental health problem.
A recent study of school shootings showed that 100% of school shooters had experienced significant childhood trauma.
Schlage said that can create a cycle of violence, that those who grow up witnessing violence often are more likely to be involved in crime later in life.
Trauma is the obvious result of gun violence, but it's also a root cause of gun violence as well.
While she recommended mental health care, Schlage said other steps should be taken, including reduced access to guns and safe gun storage. Williams agreed that improvements in mental health care are needed, but said more police resources are needed too, as well as gun policy changes across the board.
I think it needs to be federal change. I think it needs to be state changes. I think it needs to be local changes. I think we as Americans need to come together and really do something about this, and I'm confident that we'll be able to.
The hearing comes as the Senate is about to take up a package of gun reform bills in response to the shootings in Uvalde and Buffalo. Elsa Horteris, Washington, D.C., Cronkite News.
The experts agree that curbing mass shootings isn't a one-issue problem. Gun control and mental health resources are needed.
A lot of things changed during the pandemic, none more so than tourism, but some things at least are going back to normal. Alexia Stanbridge in our DC bureau has more.
There's a lot to see in Washington, but for the past 2 years, one of its highlights, the United States Capitol itself, has been off limits. But that changed just in time for some lucky Arizonans.
We're excited and happy that it's finally back open to the public.
COVID was the first hit to Capitol tourism, followed by last year's attack on the Capitol itself. And when tours finally began again, they had to be arranged through a congressional office. This group of 15 Arizonans applied right as Congressman Greg Stanton's office was resuming tours.
About a week before our tour, like, wait, this would be really cool if we could do this. Saw that it was open again, emailed our congressman, and we were able to get in.
Tourists aren't the only ones who are happy about the reopening of the Capitol. It means a lot for the city's tourism industry as well.
The Capitol building reopening is really a part of the experience for so many people that are coming to Washington.
Ferguson says domestic travel is saving a lot of major cities like D.C. Tourism was worth $8 billion to Washington in 2019 and supported about 80,000 jobs, he says. While the pandemic took a toll on the industry, Ferguson says things are looking good.
Where we are today versus 2 years ago and a year ago, a lot of optimism in Washington, D.C.
After their tour, the group was not disappointed.
The highlight for sure. And we've done a lot of stuff here. This was my favorite by far.
Scott Smith, who booked a tour through Congressman Tom O'Halloran's office, said he agrees, even though things are a little different than the last time he visited.
And it's a little bit more restricted now, so we were just really honored to be able to get a tour through the Congressman's office.
The tourist I spoke with said it's important to contact your representative early because this is a tour you don't want to miss.
I would say even if you're not into politics, I think it's just the art, the statues, just a little history. I think it's beautiful.
The Capitol is not the only place off limits to tourists. The White House was closed too, but tourists can now book tours there too through the representative's office. In Washington, Alexia Stanbridge, Cronkite News.
While most of Washington is welcoming visitors again, not everything's open. The Smithsonian's popular Air and Space Museum is closed this summer, not for COVID, but for a $250 million renovation. It's set to reopen in the fall.
A local stage production makes it all the way to New York for a run off Broadway. It's a dream come true, sort of. For the Arizona dreamer who inspired the story behind Americano, there are still more goals. Cronkite News reporter Daisy Gonzalez-Perez reports from behind the scenes curtain in New York City.
Tony Baldovino's story has taken him from Phoenix to off-Broadway and has given him the chance to meet with Barack Obama and Hamilton creator Lin-Manuel Miranda. But for Baldovino, that's not the most important part of his story.
DACA has been a saving grace. Every 2 years, I am very excited to reapply. It is a safety factor, and it is the ability to continue trying to represent ourselves and try and get to a permanent solution.
But DACA was not around when Baldovino, inspired in the wake of 9/11, tried to join the Marines at age 17. That's when he learned he was not a U.S. citizen.
And I was told that I was wasting their time. I was very confused by that experience, and I went back home, and embarrassment, anger, and just wanting to get it fixed out.
It hurt more to hear that news from the recruiter, not from his family.
The truth was revealed that day from my mother and told us that we were never part of a process in the United States. So
that story became the basis for Americano, the off-Broadway musical that has let Valdovinos continue to tell his story, through actor Sean Ewing, who plays Tony on stage.
I know it is, in some people's perspective, just a show. But in my eyes, as the artist, I have the ability to affect an entire theater. I guess in a way I am canvassing. I am giving the message out to hundreds of people every single night.
For Valdovinos, that canvassing began years ago in Arizona. It was there that he met then President Barack Obama.
I had shared my story when I met him in 2012. We had asked him for help. He told us to organize.
Obama recently met with the cast of Americano to discuss the 10th anniversary of DACA.
You know, it was incredible to meet with him. It was incredible to talk with him. But it was also a stark reality that we have a tremendous way to go.
Americano's off-Broadway run ended Sunday. But it's not the end of Valdovinos' story, which he hopes will be retold.
The idea is to get to Broadway, and that's our biggest hope, is give us a shot to Broadway.
In New York City, Daisy Gonzalez-Perez, Cronkite News.
That's it for Cronkite News tonight. Thanks for joining us. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.